and welcome to our IndigiLit series. This series highlights books and media by Indigenous or Native creators. And today we're sort of actually talking about two books. Everything you wanted to know about Indians, but were afraid to ask, both the adult and young adult versions by Anton Treuer. The adult version was published in 2012, and the young adult version was published in 2021. 2012, 2021, yep. So before we get into it, let's introduce ourselves. My name is Marissa, and I work in the outreach department. Well, let's start with our facilitator.
And I will, yes, hi. Bozu, my name is Ariel Ojibway, and I'm a member of the Sault Ste. Marie tribe and Crane Clan, and I like literature and libraries. So I'm excited to talk about this book with you all. And I'll just popcorn to Emily because you're the only one with your mic off.
All right, I'm Emily, and I'm a librarian here.
I'm Elizabeth, and I'm a library technician in the archives.
I'm Audrey, and I'm also a librarian at AADL.
My name is Beth, and I am a library technician on the outreach team of AADL.
I'm Lucy, and I am also a library technician in the youth department.
And I'm Valerie, and I work in collections. So
it's nice to be here with you all. So everything you want us to know about Indians, but we're afraid to ask, is not a novel or a piece of literature, as we all know. So we were going to do a different format this time. I was hoping that we could all choose a section that meant something to us or reflected something from your lives or taught you a lot, and that we could either read the section or read a small part of the section and then talk about what that meant to us and why we wanted to share it. But I also thought that maybe we should talk about if anybody got the children's, the young adults version versus the adults version. Was everybody able to see the adult version, or did anyone want to share anything about reading the young adult version?
I did both. I listened to the audiobooks, and I did both the adult and the young readers edition, and I liked the young readers edition a lot better because it was more inclusive and more current, and I felt like it explained some things better than like some of the laws and stuff than they did in the adult book. So,
yeah, I agree. I initially started reading I read the whole adult one, listened to it, and then we had like a work email that was like, oh, we have two versions of it. And I was like, let me check out the YA one, and just looked through and saw all the stuff that was like added since the original one. And I thought that was really interesting and like helpful because there's a lot of stuff that's happened in the past 10 years in general. And he covers a lot of that in there.
Similarly, I listened to the Young Readers Edition because that was the only way I could find it. And I'm so glad I listened to it. Not typically an audiobook person, but it was read by the author. And he just had such a wonderful, patient tone with explaining things, because I needed everything explained to me because we learned none of this in school, which is just absurd. And then eventually my copy of the adult version came, and I kind of flipped through. And a lot of it seemed either identical or was more filled out. So I'm so glad that it was a delay and that one came so that I could listen to the full version.
That's so nice that so many of you got to experience both of the books.
Yeah. I think there's a new expanded revised adult version that's going to be coming out, which I'm super excited to read. Because, yeah, we had some trouble getting the adult copies in. So I started with this one, and then it just really showed that this was written in 2012 and this was 2021. So I'm excited for the new updated version.
So I'm still in the dark. So if anyone wants to share with me things that happened in this new 21 version that weren't included at all, I mean, I'm sure there's probably like an entire chapter worth, but if there were any highlights, that would be, I'd love to know.
I made some intentional bookmarks of like things that I noticed that weren't in the original. One of them was like in response to COVID. One of the questions was, why did COVID-19 kill so many people at Navajo Nation and other reservations? So I thought that was important. And then there was stuff about the access pipeline protests in there as well. That stood out to me. I don't know, I may have more, but I'll let anyone else chime in.
Yeah, I was going to say the social activism section was really intriguing, enlightening, informative, reminding me of what all had, actually, I probably didn't even know what all had happened with the pipeline. And the way he explained it was really easy to understand. Basically, like the pipeline could go through their river 10 times, or they could have made it happen, you know, it could have just been done in a way that was manageable for everybody or agreeable. But no. So
we would prefer to go through your ceremonial grounds.
Yeah.
And your water. And all of the pipes ever have always leaked or broken or something. But yes, and yeah, that also, I mean, water always, and that also ties in with the pandemic in Navajo Nation that you mentioned. There's a lot going on there, but that was one thing that I learned during the pandemic about water access in the Navajo Nation. I had no idea there were so many people without access to like daily water. So that was something really important to learn. And, you know, just water is so important. So, yeah. And I think we all know what happened to our river lately. So that's another thing to know. Okay. But anyway, well, did either Valerie or Elizabeth or Emily, who started with the young adult too, want to start with sharing any part of what really stood out?
I chose a few different ones, but I'll just do the first one that I pulled up here. Where are the real Indians? Once I was lecturing in France, a man in the back of the room raised his hand with great excitement. French guys never get excited at academic talk, so I took his question, and his question was, where are the real Indians? I suppose he was looking for someone who just stepped off the set of a Hollywood movie with a feather headdress and a horse. I replied, where are the real Indians? Where are the real Frenchmen? There is a castle across the street and there's nobody living in it. In fact, I don't see anybody riding up and down the street on horses with shining armor. I don't even see guys with berets and little pipes. Where are the real Frenchmen? And I just really liked that passage because it's humorous, and it shows like how people think about tradition, and like we all have our ancestral backgrounds, but like, yeah, people living in France don't live in their ancestral conditions. So I just thought it was really a really good way to illustrate that in a very concise way.
Agreed. I think this book is full of lots of examples of things that you wouldn't expect people to say that happen. And that reminds me of a time that like my cousin was in a restaurant and overheard the person behind him, and they had an Ojibway shirt on, and my cousin was like, "Oh, like what? Why do you have this shirt on? Tell me more." And the person was like, "Oh, they're Native Americans. They don't exist anymore." And my cousin was like, actually they do. And and this person did not believe it. And my cousin was like, "Here's my ID," which actually, the person actually pulled off their shirt and gave it to him. But I love that. I love the finish of that story, but like having to tell people like, no, people are still here all around you, right next to you in a restaurant. It's astounding, but you have to share that sometimes. Yeah. Valerie, I noticed that you'd unmuted. Do you want to share?
Actually, the passage I was going to share was the one that Elizabeth shared because I thought that was pretty exciting. You know, it was a great way to turn it back on the person themselves and be like, you know, we're here.
Yeah.
You're, you know, we just don't look like you think we're going to look, you know.
Yeah. And where are your berets? You're still a Frenchman.
Right. Exactly.
So the passage I wanted to share was really long. I'm not sure if I should read it all, but yeah, I'll just read some of it. I'll see where I go. So it's about the author talking about growing up in the 80s in Minnesota, in this area of a lot of racial tension, and then going to college. I was looking forward to a breath of fresh air and respite from the borderland of my youth, as much as I was to the challenges of a new stage of life. And those years remain some of the most treasured. But I still had a profoundly well-educated Princetonian ask me, "Where is your tomahawk?" Another time, a woman approached me in the college gymnasium and exclaimed, "You have the most beautiful red skin." I was too flabbergasted to respond. I took a friend to see Dances with Wolves and was told, "Your people have a beautiful culture." My people come from the Great Lakes rather than the Plains, and from the modern age rather than the 19th century. But again, I had no response. I made many lifelong friends at college, and they supported but also challenged me with questions like, why should Indians have reservations? And then he talks about missing being home and then being invited to a traditional ceremony. So he was going to go to that. Hungry for a taste of home, I drove out to the wooded area where Barrett Eaglebear, a Comanche medicine woman, would conduct her ceremony, and found, to my great surprise, over 50 naked white people standing in the woods, waiting. One man was holding a staff adorned with a pair of deer antlers and chicken feathers. With great trepidation, I opened the car door. I was immediately approached by a naked white woman, roughly 60 years of age and around 190 pounds. She folded me into a tight embrace, saying, "I am so sorry for what my people have done to your people." Throughout my life, if I have ever thought or said that I had seen it all, I was soon shown something new. Part of me was furious at what looked like a bunch of white people playing Indian. This was not real. I started to question whether Eaglebear was even an Indian for allowing the charade. Part of me wanted to laugh because anyone who got a hug like that from a naked elder really couldn't do anything else. But as I carefully separated myself from her embrace, I looked at her face. She was filled with genuine remorse, on the verge of tears. Respect was a value deeply embedded in my being from my upbringing and cultural experience. Lines on her face showed the wisdom of age and experience. I couldn't laugh, and I couldn't just yell at her or give her a mean look and drive away. And in a flash, my running from the borderlands and my desire to find a way for others to travel through them brought me an epiphany. And I wanted to share that part because for me, I don't have such, overt experiences with the racial aspect most of the time. But I definitely have had people ask really awful questions. And when they learned that you're Native American, and they often immediately skip to oh, so your college was free and things like that. And you're just like, do you want to know anything else about language or culture or where we are? There are lots of other aspects. Yeah, but I think this author did such a great job through the whole book of pointing out respect, and especially of your elders, and patience, and being able to open communication is really important. And the value of respect for your elders and just being genuine in communication, I feel came across in this whole book, and that every answer was just I'm not trying to be mean or vindictive in any way. I want you to understand what happened here so we can all move forward together. So thank you so much. I think you did a really good job of that. Yeah.
My passage I pulled goes straight from that, because I did pulled the quote for his answer to the question, do all Indians have a free ride to college? Because I'll be honest, I grew up thinking that was true. And until I read this book, along with all the things it taught me that I was never taught, it also showed me a lot of things that I was sort of taught was just wrong. So he has a 2-paragraph answer. I won't read the whole thing, but the first is kind of very kindly setting people asking straight that no, though there are scholarship programs, it is not equal and it's not an across the board thing. And then I'll read his second paragraph here. Many Americans feel that Indians are somehow financially privileged in the realm of education. Although only a small percentage of Indians obtain significant financial help with college, I believe it would be perfectly fair if all Indians did get a free ride. As a matter of not only historical experience, but also direct government policy, many Indian people have been made to suffer. They suffered not just in the 19th century during the height of violence, they suffer today. The Indian population is disproportionately unemployed and impoverished. Financial opportunities have been slow in coming to Indian country. Considering all that America does to address poverty throughout the world, including funding the United Nations and the World Bank, it is high time for this country to do more for its Indian citizens. And rather than a handout, I think educational benefits would be perfectly appropriate. And I just thought, gee, synthesizing so much in one paragraph that has conviction without sounding, it wasn't angry, even though, gee, I feel like he could be real angry. But especially listening again to the audiobook and having him calmly explain all of these things, I so appreciate, as someone who needed a lot of education, that he was willing to take the role to do that. Because of course, the role of an educator is work.
Thank you so much for sharing that passage. Yeah. I think it was a really good one to share, and for also commenting on the role of his education work. He's been doing a great job. So yeah.
I think that the part, sorry, I was saying the part I picked was maybe right after that, Emily, but I can wait until you're done, Ariel.
No, I was gonna go on a rant about
no, go
the university, and I don't really want to go on another rant. I'll stop myself. Okay.
Well, I mean, and this could lead into a discussion of any of those things, because it's towards the end of the book, and the section is like the perspectives, coming to terms, and future directives. But the question he asks is, why are Indians so often imagined rather than understood? And I mean, I can read part of the answer. Like, he talks about the civil rights movement that addressed African Americans, and there've been women's rights movement. There hasn't really been any similar effort or attention at the time of this book, to do that for Indians. And he talks about how very few Indians have PhDs or write books, and there are very few in positions of financial or political power. And I just thought that the question was really interesting, because I think it relates to everything that he is telling us, and all the questions that he's answering in the book, is that, like, everybody there's so much that he does in this book to dispel the imaginings that people have had about Indians and all the things that we never received, because that's not the history that's being told. And so there are assumptions made about education. There are assumptions made about life on reservations. There are assumptions made about alcoholism. And then there are assumptions made about the culture and the language without anyone even learning, because we've only ever been presented as a nation at large with these imaginings. So I just thought that the question was really a great thing to continue to think about as I thought about everything that I'd read in the book.
Oh, I was just going to say, I really liked how that the question was asked and framed that way. It made me gave me a little more thought to like you said, Lucy, everything that he's already presented, but I hadn't really framed it in that way of real or imagined, but it's exactly that, you know?
And I think I would also go as far as to say the assumptions aren't even necessarily their assumptions now, maybe that some people make, but for a long time, and maybe even now, often are kind of just downright lies and purposeful omissions to change the story into one that works best for the genocide of a whole peoples, well, many peoples on Turtle Island. And so, yeah.
Well, that's
So
another why I liked this passage too. I think it spoke to the general like erasure that has happened since people came and stole this land and all they worked to assimilate and genocide, and there's that erasure, but then I think also there's this erasure on the other side of the people trying to erase their own discomfort to say like, well, I'm going to feel better about existing on this stolen land and doing all these things because of these myths and lies that you're saying have been perpetuated.
And I think that naked white woman is like the perfect example of that, because she feels all this guilt and he's like, guilt isn't productive. It's not going to fix it. And I think that's really important to know, is like, your white guilt isn't like, if you feel bad about it, if you know the history and you feel bad, that's not going to do anything about it. You have to do more than that.
And I think that was beautifully put, erasure on the other side, erasure on both sides. Yeah.
I was just wondering, curious if anyone knows, is it still not discussed in history books? I mean, maybe that's a dumb question, but like, is it truly omitted? The whole, like, the Trail of Tears, Andrew Jackson's, what he did, is that even being taught in high school?
Sure it depends on the schools, the school district and the school and the teachers themselves, and how much they know about it themselves or are interested in finding out and are able to change the curriculum to share.
It feels like one of those things where there's a lot of room for shades of gray, if that makes sense. Like there is, I think there are probably plenty of places that teach about like just the Trail of Tears, for example. And then you don't talk about lots of other Indian removal programs, or you don't go in depth into like what it means, or all of the ways in which like our government behaved badly in that, even in that particular instance, right? Like the people that made that treaty were not representative of the people that were removed, even though they were from like related tribes. Like they weren't representative of all of those people. So like, I think that there's a lot of ways that this being like an unpleasant thing in our history, and particularly with the way that we deal with unpleasant things in our history, it's very easy to like let us off the hook because like it's too like because the subject matter is too unpleasant or like whatever, right? Like I think there's a lot of ways that our culture like kind of excuses that behavior and like not looking, which then allows people to like innocently perpetuate a lot of these harmful ideas because they don't know.
I mean, the 2 days maybe that you learn about the Trail of Tears in high school certainly doesn't balance out the 2 months that you essentially learn about these imagined Indians in elementary school. I mean, look back, it wasn't terribly long ago that I was in elementary school, and it just makes me cringe with thinking about the ways that we learned about this. But I remember that better than anything that I learned in high school having to do with Indians.
Yeah, I think about like Thanksgiving even, that we're all told this story, and the imagery, like when I was in elementary school, that went around Thanksgiving, like cartoonish pilgrims and Indians, and it's just this huge omission and this huge lie, and our entire country has built, you know, so many traditions and this huge holiday and like retail stuff around it. It's just a really good example of how pervasive, like how much there is that is not uncovered, I think.
There is a group called Illuminative. I think it's illuminative.org, and they're doing work on making modern Native people more present in mainstream culture, more visible, maybe is the way I should say that. And like sending out surveys to Native people and seeing how they want to be represented and how they want to participate in everything. And it's a really good organization and website. And they also have work on like changing curriculum in different states. And so I've read through a little bit of some suggestions and things there. And so things have taken a long time and are still taking a long time, but some good work is being done.
Yeah, but there's also way more work being done to not educate, especially like
or to repress.
Yeah,
when
repress.
It starts a little bit.
Yeah.
And then they're like, never mind, outlaw your lies. And they're like, oh, you mean the truth? Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Especially in, like in Florida and other states, Texas. Yeah. I do have a passage that I wanted to, it was more just what caught my mind as I read. There was the question in the social activism is, why is there such a fuss about public art statues and place names now? And so toward the end of a pretty long answer, he talks about what's happening in Hawaii, which I thought was really interesting. I've never been to Hawaii, but in Hawaii, most of the town and street names have been changed to Hawaiian words at the request and with the guidance of the Native Hawaiian community. Minnesota changed Lake Calhoun, named after a Southern slaveholder, to its original Dakota name, Bidimakaska, after lots of political fighting. And there are just a few of many similar efforts to create respectful visibility for Natives and their history. Many battles are lost, resistance is real, and significance is tied up with the fear that many whites have that they, after erasing so many tribes, languages, cultures, will somehow experience their own erasure. Those fears are unfounded. Anyway, at the end, it's the MLK quote, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice." Mainly, I thought that was really good to know and interesting that they named the streets in Indigenous names. And it would be great to see that more often. Like on street signs and just having, I was on a trip to Scotland recently, and I was really surprised at how much Gaelic is used. I mean, it's not, it could end up being the same kind of language that gets carried forward if there was enough interest. I mean, there's universities that teach in Gaelic. So anyway, I just thought it was very cool, interesting.
In that same area towards the end of the book, he talks about how Bemidji, Minnesota, has started doing bilingual things and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I think that is, we need more grassroots organizations that step up and do that, and people to learn the whatever language the tribe uses around their area, so that people can communicate and, but also help preserve the language and stuff. I really liked that they were starting to do that, and I'm hoping, other people will do that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
along lines with language preservation. I didn't pick this quote, but one of the things it made me think of was the way that learning other languages exposes you to different ways of thinking. Like we don't think about the ways that like different like thought paths, I guess, are like codified in our language. And like I read Braiding Sweetgrass a couple years ago, and I know, such a good book. One of the like most revelatory things in that book for me was she talks about learning her native language and the idea that like they speak about what we think of as inanimate objects as like equals and like living places. Like a lake might be like referred to as like a he or a she, or like just like a living other. And that's like something our language doesn't like make room for. So like there's a value, I think, in preserving these languages, because there's like that's not like unique to like the language she was learning, right? Like all languages are going to have these kind of like significant like different ways of thinking about things that are worth I would say probably worth preserving, because they expose you to like different ways of thinking about things that could be like really significant and beneficial.
And like re-indigenizing this place and our thoughts. And yeah, exactly. Oh, I love that in Braiding Sweetgrass, and just opening up your mind to other ways of seeing the world through language. And I'm being greedy, but I'm sharing another part of the book because I also wanted to catch that part that said, how do tribal languages encapsulate a different worldview, which also spoke to the like elders and our way of viewing them. So just as morphemes carry possibilities for humor, they also carry deeper and more resonant meanings that shape attitudes. In Ojibway, for example, the word for an old woman, Mindemuye, literally means one who holds things together, describing the role of the family matriarch. In English, well, we know. Anyway, the point is, like, the respect is built into the word, and the values is built into the language. And also the gender neutral term for an elder in Ojibwe, Kiche Aya. Okay, I can't do it. Kiche Aya literally means great being. And it is just so cool to see the world through a different language, and one that was built on this land and waterways and beings here. So yeah, I'm glad that that part spoke to you, or Braiding Sweetgrass did. And then somebody just told me that they went to a small school in Colorado, and that like a lot of their buildings and street names and everything were named after Native tribes, and like in cooperation with some of the Native groups there. And I was like, what? Can we get even one over here? That's awesome though. Yeah. Did anybody else want to share any passages?
I can share my passage. It kind of goes, I should have jumped in earlier when we were talking about history stuff. So sorry, we're going to circle back a little bit. But mine's from the question, why does getting the Columbus story right matter? And it's like a pretty long answer, so I'm not going to read the whole thing. But the paragraph that really stood out to me was, here in the United States, very little effort has been made to voice formal apologies, make reparations, or pass political mandates about education. Yet this country was founded in part by genocidal policies directed at Native Americans and the enslavement of Black people. Both of those things are morally repugnant. Still, I love my country. In fact, it is because I love my country that I want to make sure that the mistakes of our past, our dark chapters, do not get repeated. We cannot afford to sugarcoat the dark chapters of our history as we have for decades upon decades. It is time for that to stop. And I really loved that passage because I thought it was like, I think it's a very good response, particularly to like some of the movements we're seeing now to like not teach history, certain topics in schools, about like why it is important and like why people so deeply want these things to be taught, because it is about like bettering us all. And, you know, we are vulnerable to the mistakes of the past if we don't know what those mistakes are. And ignoring them is like, it's like ignoring like a cut on your hand that gets infected and then like slowly becomes gangrene, right? Like then you have to cut your whole arm off.
It's true.
But, you know, like, it's just one of those things that it can easily become terminal or quite bad.
I liked his discussion of like going to Europe and going to see like the remnants of the Holocaust and how different regions dealt with that. And like in Poland, it was like very visible, but everywhere else he went in Germany, other than Auschwitz, was like, or is Auschwitz in Poland? I don't know, whatever. He was like, there was no signage, but in Poland, there was all this signage and it was like a major thing. And it was as if the people who it happened to wanted to memorialize this so it wouldn't happen again. Whereas the other aspect of like the lack of signage and kind of hiding it was like kind of not wanting to brush it under the rug and not address it. And I just thought it was really poignant to like compare that history to our history, because we really don't do a good job of any recognition of any of these wrongdoings. And it's like, clearly our country was built on all these horrible foundations, and we're just like rolling with it, not taking any moment to have any critical thought or like a monument to this. The monuments we discussed are the monuments we don't want to see. Monuments to Columbus, monuments to people that hurt others and did this genocidal those genocidal acts here.
Yeah, I had both the passage Audrey read and what Elizabeth was just talking about. Those were some of my tabs, which I think this book also provided so much context for like the scope of things. So one of the other stats that I had marked was from the very first section on history, how many Indigenous people were in North and South America before contact. Nobody knows the exact number, but most scholars agree that it was at least 90 million, which that number wasn't even in the adult version. So at least between 2012 and 2021, like that's such a huge number. And it goes on to say like anything published before 2000 is probably just plain wrong, that they constantly just underestimated how many people there were. And I had a couple other little short bits that sort of were connected, like when you're talking in the language section about how many tribal languages are spoken. There are around 2,300 tribal languages spoken in North and South America before sustained contact with Europe. 500 in what is now the United States and Canada, 300 in Mexico, with the remaining 1,500 spoken in South America. And there are now around 650 total in all of America. So just like the huge scope of how many groups and peoples existed and what it got shrunk down to through genocide. Like I really appreciated how he talked about genocide, and it was like, why do people say that? Because it's literally, it fits perfectly the definition. Which is then why I thought one of the other sections about language was so impactful. So this is a little bit longer one. Indian people value their languages for many other reasons as well. They're cornerstones of identity, and their use keeps us recognizable to our ancestors. They're defining features of our nationhood. The retention of tribal languages tells the world that we have not been assimilated in spite of 500 years of colonial effort to achieve that.
That was literally the other passage I bookmarked, Marissa.
There's just a lot of good sections.
Right?
Beth, I feel like you were gonna say something earlier, maybe.
Oh, well, I had taken notes myself about mandating education, specific to the Holocaust and how that would be, I mean, it's long overdue. But again, with the way so many of the other political things are going, I don't see it happening anytime soon. Although maybe in Michigan, there would be a better opportunity for better education. I don't know.
I just want to say, like, I learned quite a bit about the Holocaust in school, so much more than the genocide of Native Americans. Like, I didn't learn really the impact of that, or like the reality of it until college. And I don't think that's even typical for college students to encounter that material, just in an undergraduate program. So I think that's a very interesting thing that we would focus so much of our curriculum on the Holocaust, which I do think is very important to study, but like that is a huge point of study whereas there's no acknowledgement of the treatment of Native and indigenous people.
Yeah.
I think that's easier to stomach teaching too, especially here, because in theory, we were the good guys. We came in to help with the Holocaust. And with the Native genocide, we were very much the bad guys. Our country, it's maybe harder to teach. That means it really should be taught so that folks can learn about it, and learn about it not by stumbling across it in a book and trying to figure it out on your own, but with the help of educators and parents and students. It seems like that would be the ideal way to learn about this, so that you can process. Because when you're young, learning about bad things is hard and important, and you need to be helped through it.
I think another interesting point is that a lot of Hitler's inspiration came from actually the genocide of Native Americans and the eugenics movement, which were both American. So the Americans are definitely not.
Yeah, they literally had a commission to study the South and Jim Crow laws. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I think, no, I was saying, yeah, part of the, I think, like, I spent a huge, like half of a year probably, I think, in early high school studying the Holocaust. And I think like a lot of that is the idea that we need to teach you about what genocide is because it's so horrible. And that's not, as you're saying, Elizabeth and Emily, like not being applied to our country, where, as like the author here explains all the ways that this was a genocide, not just, that there's so many insidious ways as the way the genocide is defined, that it happened and for a long period of time in this country, and is still having effects. But yeah, it's probably hard to talk about because we don't want to admit our wrongdoing, but it's like if your motivation is to teach about genocide, then you should really look at that,
Look inward.
Right, exactly.
I think that in general, we're not terribly good at teaching history in our school system in general. Like it was not till I was much older and like just kind of discovered history on my own that I found it to be interesting, which is a shame because it's fascinating in its own way. But I think that's, to be honest, I think that's part of it, because the way that we present history in our schools is a very linear, right? We have like our westward expansion. I can't remember what it is. The like God-given mandate to like expand, and we don't. Yes, thank you. And we don't really like examine the flip side of what that is, and how this isn't like he talks about, like this wasn't a new land, like people were already here. So
yeah, like what? It's an empty garden. This forest looks like somebody landscaped it or something. No, really? Like people were cultivating it as a garden for food? Yeah.
I mean, yeah, studying a straight line isn't interesting, right? So
yeah, I was just, one of the things I think I was going to say earlier, I never knew until I think my daughter went to Pine Ridge Reservation for an internship when she was like a sophomore. So she's in her 30s now. But anyway, so like 10, 12 years ago. And I didn't know till then that Mount Rushmore was built on, sacred land and sacred.
The Black Hills.
Yeah, the Black Hills. Yes. And that, I mean, after when I learned that, I just had a totally different perspective of that structure, and like I would not even want to go visit it, not that aspect of it, but just the symbolism of it. We shot glass for a gift, it was like, yeah, maybe not so hot. I don't need to have this Mount Rushmore thing in my house. So
up another we could go down. I won't really, but like, you know, with national parks and
I was just gonna say that. Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh no, you can go. No, go ahead. No, I'll let you keep going. Yeah.
So, like pristine wilderness, remove the humans, literally remove the Native American humans who were living there, so we can preserve the pristine wilderness for future generations, but not allow the interconnectedness, because humans are part of the natural world and nature and can work with it and have in past stewarded it well and work together. And if you just rip them out, you are ripping out another part of the ecosystem that was there. There are lots of good resources to learn about that, good podcasts and stuff. Sorry, Lucy, did you?
Oh no, I was just going to say that. And also I even think that the national parks were in part created as like a place that like white people could go to enjoy the land without indigenous people around, you know? So it's like, we're gonna, it's very,
Just another thing to add to it.
Mm-hmm.
Which is, Marissa, the passage that you read, the last passage that you read, after like reading all of this book and, you know, like adding in there and everything, and just thinking about it in like a familial context, in my own family context, but also is the history of our nation, just like disease and famine and genocide, and then relocation and termination, and like the outlawing spirituality and languages and dancing and like literally everything. And after all of that and so much more, just being like, you know what? There are still like 570 how many tribes, and there's still this much language, and there's still this much power and people here. That's amazing and awesome, and I'm so proud. Yeah. One of those, I'm just gonna take a minute, because I mentioned one time before this blog, I think it was called Project. Does anybody know where I'm going with this? It's a Native blog. Project 562 is a website and was a blog created by Matika Wilbur, and it was a multi-year national photography project dedicated to photographing people from each of the, at the time, 562 federally recognized tribes, and now there are 500, I don't know, 74, maybe 75 tribes, and it's just a really awesome website and just a really cool place where you can see people living their everyday lives right now throughout Turtle Island, and it's a really great representation of a whole bunch of people still here. So yeah. I think that was a wonderful discussion about this book. If anybody wants to share anything more right now, you are very welcome to, but I just want to say thank you. Thank you so much. It sounds like you all like really opened your minds and hearts and everything, and are maybe even going to share about this book with other people, and that's really exciting. Thank you.
Thank you so much for facilitating, Ariel, unless anybody else has final thoughts. But I would definitely recommend this for people, even if they don't read it straight through, like we mostly did for this discussion, but there's a great table of contents where you can see all the questions and pick through it as you will. So I highly recommend this book.
Yep, I've already recommended it.
Yeah, I have.
Oh,
Yeah.
nice.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for being here. Thank you again, Ariel, for facilitating, and thank everyone for watching, and we will see you next time.
Bumblebee.
Bye.
Mhm.